What up, Marsh Pod? Thursday morning. Great slate of hoops yet again. The best part, I think, of early season basketball, regardless of the league, is how the standings end up shaken out in ways that we might not have expected. Reigning Trays 3-1. They struggled immensely last season. They already have 3 wins on the season. Lone Star Basketball, who couldn't get consistency for all of last year and basically up until the start of this season, 3-0. Meanwhile, you've got Run DMV 1-2. I mean, major question marks about not necessarily the coaching, but what's this roster look like? Is the Pacific Rim division 4 deep with Asia Pacific now at 2-2 and Best Coast Ballers winning their last 2? This is the best part because we get so many things that we just don't know about, and we have such a small sample size that you're justified to jump to any conclusion that you wish to. And we're going to jump to a conclusion on the H-Town Hoopers. But first, a couple breaking news items, follow-ups. One follow-up, one breaking news items that we're bringing to you live on the Marsh Pod. You're not going to get this information anywhere else. So the first one, we'll do follow-up. We'll save this breaking news tidbit for number 2. So the follow-up, Malik Drayton. The suspension is indefinite, meaning that he will, and this is per the league, he will have no association with SimWorld Hoops in any manner now and into the future. So the Malik Drayton era from SimWorld Hoops is done. This isn't an Adam Max where it's worth pointing out the Adam Max suspension was not levied by the league. That suspension was brought down by the organization, by the yacht club. So changes to that suspension, this is not reporting on if that's happening or not, that would be done at a team level unless the league felt there was reason for a further suspension. Think of it as the John Morant situation. He was suspended initially by the team. The league, NBA, came back and suspended him for 8 games, 6 of which he had already served. We don't need to get into a conversation on that. Use that information with what you will. But that's the Malik Drayton. He's not coming back to SimWorld Hoops. You can be upset that somebody got suspended for speaking their mind, but spoiler alert, sometimes speaking your mind can be very detrimental to you. Sometimes what you say can be foolish, and even more so, who you say it to can be foolish. Comments made at high-ranking league officials tend to not go well, regardless of the organization you work in. If you want to work for a big company and you want to say something bad about the CEO to the CEO, believe it or not, they can take actions against you. So anyone out there that's saying, "Oh well, he shouldn't have been suspended. She just gets suspended for speaking his mind." Yeah, well, that kind of shit happens, buddy. Don't know what fantasy you've been living in, but there are consequences to actions that might not be what you like. On to more breaking news. Jamon Moore of the ATLians was detained last night by Atlanta police. He was subsequently booked for reckless driving charges. That's all we currently know on that one. His current status with the team is unknown. The team released a statement. They are aware of the situation and they're working with law enforcement. So certainly a lot that's going to develop on this one. But as of now, Jamon Moore arrested for reckless driving, and his future with the ATLians is up in the air. All right, moving on to the aforementioned surprises of the early season. And I'd be remiss to note, we've talked about and I've spoken about Beyond the Arch. They've done a great job. This just goes back to that earlier sell in the open. Quick runs and quick falls can change literally the entire perception of you early in the season, and Beyond the Arch with their back-to-back wins suddenly is kind of resurrecting after 24-point losses. They're now 2-2, and you start wondering what could they maybe become in a Frontier division that's still wide open with Rocky Mountain sitting on top at 2-0. But the team that I think might be the most surprising is the H-Town Hoopers. Sitting on top of the Tropic Division, they're 3-0. They had yet another comeback victory. This one came over the Yacht Club, who It's worth watching. 1-2 now on the season. I think that's a team that's better than their record, but 1-2 on the year. But Houston uses a massive 36-5 third quarter to pull back in a game in which they were left for dead. They scored 36 in the third, 19 in the fourth quarter. For our mathematicians out there, it's going to be 55 points. They outscored the Yacht Club 55-20. And they only scored 20 points themselves in the first half. So a complete flipping of the script. So I'm not going to jump to a conclusion, so to speak, but I'm going to walk us to one. I'm going to walk us to a conclusion. We're going to go classic pros cons list. Jim Halper, get out the notepad. Positives, negatives on the H-Town Hoopers. Let's start with the negatives, because there's actually more positives, in my opinion, on H-Town than there are negatives. So we're going to go with the negative first. So the first negative, and spoiler alert, this is going to factor into our positives, but the fact that they are able to rally and that they have to rally. That's both the positive and the negative. The negative is that you are an inconsistent team to the point that you need to have a 50-point second half. And look, this is not the first time that they've had to use a big quarter, right? They scored 34 in the fourth, right, against Latin America, outscored them by 24 in a game that they won by 5 in the fourth quarter. But the fact that they are falling behind to this extent is still a major concern, okay? Because as this season plays out, what we're going to figure out is there inconsistent offense or their inconsistent defense? What's actually there? Here's a stagnant offense. 4 of the 12 quarters they've played in, they've scored 10 or less points. 7 of the 12 quarters they've played in, they've scored less than 15. 15 points would literally just be averaging 60 points, which you could argue isn't going to win you a lot of games. But that's the offense just gets bogged down at various and long stretches of time. You look at that game against the Yacht Club, 8 points and 12 points in the first 2 quarters, 20 first quarter points, or first half points. That's not really the recipe for coming back. And so the biggest concern that you're going to have looking at H-Town is that stagnant offense a indication of a team that just can't figure out how to get scoring, get offense created, or is it a team that's still working out how to get there and they eventually get there? One of those two things is going to be true. They eventually figure it out or they don't. This first 3 games has shown us that both of those are very legitimate possibilities. And if they don't figure out their stagnant offense that just goes quiet for 8 to 16 minutes at a time, up to 24 minutes at a time in the case of their opener against Latin America, that's a problem. Let's go to the positives. Those are the 2 negatives. The fact that they have to rally is a negative, and their stagnant offense. Positives, we already talked about it a little bit, but they've shown the ability to rally. It's very difficult to come back from games in which you're facing a massive halftime or fourth quarter deficit. They've trailed entering the fourth quarter in every single game they've played in. The fact that they've been able to pull themselves out of that is incredibly impressive. That's not something that's easily attainable, and it's not something to be overlooked. They're also very capable of offensive explosions. We talked about the 36-point quarter against the Yacht Club, but then that 34-point quarter against Latin America in the opener. That's actually the only 2 times they've scored 20 or more points in a quarter. They had one 19-point quarter last night against the Yacht Club, but that's what, and they did have a fourth quarter 19 against Africa as well. But that's the danger with this team is they can erupt at any given moment. And that's what allows them to make these comebacks. If they can string that together, 34 points in the fourth, and then you make it 17 instead of 13 against Latin America, now you're much closer into the fourth and you're pulling away from teams. So if they can extend that explosive offense to be more than just 2 30-point quarters and more 20-point quarters, this is a very legitimate team. They also have a very diverse offensive attack. In their 3 games, they've had 3 different high scores. In the opener, it was Keith and Carter. He had 16. In the game against Africa, it was Aaron Payne, who had a massive 18 points, 16 rebound, double-double. And then in the game against Yacht Club, it was Tyrell Thompson. He had 17 points, 8 of 13 shooting. And then you look at their second scores. Martin Genov was the second highest scorer with 16 against Houston, and Vincent Magic had 12. That was your top three scorers. Keith and Carter had 13. Against Africa, your second highest scorer was Keith and Carter at 10, and Genov has 8. And then in the win over Latin America, Genov has 13, Vincent Magic has 14. On the season, they have 5 players averaging 9.3 points or more. That's hard to do in this league, but they have 5 players. Keith and Carter at 13, Genov at 12.3, Vincent Magic at 10.3, Aaron Payne at 9.3, and Tyrell Thompson at 9.7. Those are your 10 guys averaging 9 points or more. That's good. That's good. I'll go to the counterpoint and say you'd like to see one of those guys pop as the go-to player. But overall, Aaron Payne shooting 70% from the floor through 3 games. Tyrell Thompson, 48.3. Magic, 48.3. Those are good numbers. They might not have a guy you can turn to, but they have a starting 5. They have a 5-man rotation that they can put out there that you could say, we're going to get a bucket from any one of these guys. You can't sag away from them because they're going to make you pay. And then they have an extremely capable defense. Kind of lost in these offensive needs to rally is that their defense has been lights out. The most points they've allowed is 63. They've kept teams 60 or under twice through 3 games. They've had 2 quarters where they've given up less than 10 points. Obviously not as great as the fact that they've only had 4 quarters where they've had 4 quarters of their own like that, but twice they've held the opponent to 10 or fewer points, including a 2-point first quarter from Africa, in which they led 17-2 after the first quarter. And then, of course, last night, 36-5, a 21-point advantage in the third quarter against the Yacht Club. So their defense, when it seizes up, it's as elite as it comes. They've had 4 quarters in which they've allowed 10 or less points, and then 7 quarters where they've allowed 15 or less. So, yeah, they've needed 30-plus point quarters to make these rallies and to win these basketball games, but they've done it, and they've gotten back in these games, not only because their offense goes nuts, but because their defense has this ability to be bad boys level lockdown. I mean, it is impressive that a team can go 17-2. 36-5. I mean, those are massive, massive runs. It's not as if they're walking in and it's, those 2 points that are 10 or less are 9 points, are 8 points, which, by the way, of the 4 points that their stagnant offense has been held to 10 or fewer, it's been 8, 9, and then 6. The 6 is the tough one. I'm not saying 8 and 9 are good, but it's better than 5 and 2, which is what their defense has been able to do. And at the same time, it's not like these quarters are just rock fights, 9-7 quarters that they've held the team to under 10 points. It's not, like we said, 36-5. That's a huge disparity. 17-5 or 17-2. That advantage is why they were able to make that comeback against Africa. So if their defense can maintain that level of aggression and you just get a slightly more consistent offense at H-Town, this is a very, very legitimate team. But if that offense never comes around and they instead become a team that relies heavily on their defense, when they go up against teams with more firepower, like Gotham 5, like Bay Area Breakers, like Showtime Basketball, that's going to be what reveals what this team really is. And we'll take a quick look as you peek ahead for their schedule. Their next games are South America, Middle East, and Europe. Those are favorable games. Southeast, Middle East, and Europe. South America, Middle East, and Europe. South America comes in at 2-0. That's a huge matchup for them to take early control of the Tropic Division. Middle East is 1-1, and then Europe's 0-3. So there's a very real capability that we flip the calendar from March to April, and H-Town is 5-1, 4-2, and either of those outcomes is going to be a massive improvement over what was a disappointing and dysfunctional team a year ago. So 3 games, it's the ultimate small sample size, but this is a group that has been showing some flashes of what could be a really, really exciting and dominant basketball team. And I think by the end of this month, we're going to get a better idea of just exactly what this team is made of. All right, SimWorld takes the weekend off. Don't get used to it. No games until Monday, March 20th. When we're going to get our primetime broadcast game, Rocky Mountain Monsters against the Indy Stripes. That's in Colorado. And then the North in Cascadia and Middle East and South America. 8 p.m. is the tip on Rocky Mountain. So that'll be our return to hoops. Enjoy a weekend off, early season, get the legs rested, and we'll talk to you Tuesday.